I have friends who've worked in public housing in Germany and in the States. In Germany, for example, I had a friend who worked in Marzahn, which, as we know, is a major post-war development with 50,000 or 100,000 units. And he actually moved in to be closer to the community. And when he did that, he had a guy say to him, "I don't understand why you're moving in. Our whole dream is to get out." And I think probably similar things would be said in certain public housing units in the States, where there are just an incredibly high number of units that were built to service a population that needed housing. And so I remember last time when we talked, I raised the question, how as an architect does one set about designing something to meet a need on a mass scale? You know, we need 1,000 apartments or 10,000 apartments or 100,000 apartments, as was the case in Marzahn. How does one go about that from a design standpoint and not create a kind of uniformity which people then find soulless, which just seems like a slot to put people?
Well, design is one topic, but regarding these buildings after the war, they are in some respects critical. One, especially in the East German part of Berlin, there is this topic of acoustics. So you can hear your neighbors very, very clearly. So this is for some people something which is just not acceptable. These flats can be sometimes are really big and cheap, but in terms of acoustics and sanitary devices, it's just not what people expect nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So this can be an argument for people to say we want to get out of here, but for some other people they say I don't care, actually I need a big nice flat. Sometimes these are really high buildings and sometimes they have a beautiful view, so or they're very central. In Berlin it's around Alexanderplatz. There are a lot of buildings which are just center and attractive for some people.
Mm-hmm.
But design-wise, we have in Germany, we have, of course, strong regulations for buildings, which make life for architects sometimes pretty hard, especially regarding energy saving regulations and fire regulations and acoustic and everything. So this makes building nowadays really expensive. So there are some architects who say we need to change these regulations because what we need is now adequate, good buildings, but we don't need a high-tech building, which is so expensive that we take away the money from other things like design or so to make them achievable at all.
Oh, I see. So you're saying the high standard which is set for those other things necessarily has to come out of the budget somewhere else, and you're saying perhaps it's in the design stage that it gets taken out. One of the things that I remember you mentioning is that if one was going to build something to a very large scale, the question comes up of how do you reproduce a kind of diversity which would normally only happen when multiple people were involved? You know, how can any one architect do things which to some extent might contradict his own principles? You know, you have on a street, you have two buildings, and the same architect would never have built both of those buildings, but as they juxtapose against each other, it makes for an interesting variety that seems realistic. And you mentioned that in some projects you would actually contract out different buildings to different designers. Was that in a conversation we had?
Sure.
Have you ever been involved in a project like that where you were one of several architects working on different facets?
Well, actually not, but this has to do with that I'm dealing with existing buildings.
That's right.
Most of the time. But just across the street, if I point across the street, there's a big development of housing. Big means 700 flats. And the investor is delegating these 700 to, I think, 10 different architects.
Oh, wow.
So there's a master plan of, in this case, Sauerhof-Hatton. They won the competition, and now the investor says, okay, thank you for that. You're doing the center part and some other buildings, and the rest are doing other architects to get sort of variety. But the master plan is fixed, so the sort of city design is fixed, and the architects get under control of this master plan. This is a common thing to get more variety.
Earlier, you mentioned the construction standards in Germany, and that was one of the things which actually drew me into considering, when I was looking at making a bit of a career shift, considered architecture, considered urban planning, and for all my love of my country, it's one of the things that I notice immediately when I come home, that things are not built nearly as well as they are in Germany. So having your understanding of standards and materials that are used in the German context, what are your, let's say you're building a mid-rise, it's, 6 stories or something. What's your best to pretty good to least acceptable construction methods? And we talked about this, and I was kind of surprised what you said.
Oh, this is not so easy to answer what the most adequate construction would be, but there certainly is concrete involved, but certainly there's also wood involved nowadays, and the mixture of wood and concrete can be really interesting. So, for instance, concrete slabs and a wooden facade which is load-bearing, and well, in Germany they just realized a high-rise building in wood with Arabs, and so this is going really ahead. This is a really popular construction method. The wood industry is very strong in Germany, so they're really pushing that. And the combination, I think, to concrete, especially in the stair areas and for stiffening the whole house, is necessary. And so this is quite a good thing. In America, you have this wooden construction method quite developed as well. But
now, by wood, I was confused when you said that, because I thought of kind of the stick frame. But you're talking about timber, like big, huge beams, right? And this is not something that I was really familiar with until you said that, and I was really surprised. But so in a timber frame house, you just have these massive, massive beams that basically, instead of a steel beam, you have a huge timber beam. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, you don't have really timber beams anymore. You have slabs made of completely prefabricated wooden slabs.
Okay, yeah.
Which have a certain height and a width, and they come and are completely finished with electrical installations and everything. And this is more what I think. It's not single beams, but it's slabs, prefabricated facade elements, completely prefabricated.